Back to order for Thursday, March 15th, and invite you to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In case of fire, there are two ways to exit the chambers. To my left, you'd exit through the council chamber doors, turn left, walk down one flight of stairs, turn left again, and outside of the building. Perhaps the best way would be to enter or exit the doors at the rear of the chambers. In either case, once you're outside of the chambers or outside of the building, please walk a safe distance away from the building. Secretary, please take the roll.
Charles Duran.
Here.
Charles Ladd.
Here.
Mary Scott.
Here.
Ken Nelson.
Here.
Virginia Higley.
Here.
Linda DeGray.
Here.
Sarah Gruber.
Here.
Guillermo Salazar.
Here.
And Rich Suzak is here.
Okay. The absent commissioner is Nick Lefakis, and Commissioner Salazar will be sitting in for him. Thank you. I was get tangled up here. It was cold before. Thank you. Push it. Okay. Approval of minutes, March 1st.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for March 1st, 2018.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any errors, additions, or omissions?
I did find one. Found one on page 2, paragraph 5. Says in there that in the final inspection before the building permit was issued, but signed off and says inhabitable space. It should say uninhabitable space.
Yep.
That's the only one I found.
Anyone further? Hearing none, all in favor as amended? Unanimous. Yeah.
It was very well written. It was very well written.
Did a good job.
Yeah,
They're
good
getting
job.
that much. That's right. It's quite a change. At this point in the meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission welcomes comments, concerns, and opinions relating to planning and zoning in Enfield from anyone who's present, provided you may not discuss any matter of business at this time that is already elsewhere on the agenda, any matter that's part of an open public hearing of the commission, or a matter where a decision of the commission may be pending. Anyone would like to address the commission under those conditions? Anyone like to address the commission under those conditions? Anyone would like to address the commission under those conditions? Hearing none. There is no bond release, and old business public hearing 2879, 91 Simon Road. Anyone, this is an open public hearing that is extended to April 5th, but it is still on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak in favor or against this application? Anyone in the audience would like to speak in favor or against the application? Roger, this mandatory closing date is the 12th of April.
Yes, sir. Which is your second Thursday of the month, so if you wanted to, you could have take it up on the 5th and also have a meeting on the 12th, or any day in between, but then you would have to close the public hearing on the 12th.
I was wondering if they would consider withdrawing. I mean, it's given an awful short time to us, and withdraw without prejudice and even not require a
You would incorporate the entire existing rec it into the new application.
Absolutely, but I mean, it would give us time, or the commission
Representative
time
is
to, we got new material tonight, give us
Right.
time to get things together, and I think you told me there were some things that still needed to be,
Right.
Yeah,
The last discussion I had, and the attorney can speak for himself, is there's still items that he's working on to get to us, to get to you, particularly responsive to the questions that were originally asked. He's still working on a letter from Clarence Welty, and he's still working on a couple of other items responsive to the questions that were raised. So, assuming you get them in a week, you're only going to have a week to look at them.
well, that's what I mean, and I hate to try to do an honest job in that amount of time, or for them, or for us.
I guess my only question is, can we consent to an extension of the 4/12 date? I mean,
You've run out of time. The clock has
Okay.
all run out. Statutorily, you can only give us X amount of days, which the
Right.
412 runs it. So I guess what the chairman is suggesting is if we incorporated the entire file and the testimony up
Right.
until this point in it, then there would be no harm,
yeah,
no foul.
if there's no additional fee or something, we could withdraw and
No, I think
resubmit.
I
Yeah,
have,
sure.
or asked the commission to vote that we wouldn't charge you the additional fee.
Right.
But I don't think it's fair to either us or to you.
Right.
More importantly,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fine with my client. We've done that sort of before, so I guess we would sort of, I would give Roger a letter saying
Right, well-
withdraw it and submit it with the, he's already got the letter
You
for
just have
it.
to fill it in.
Yeah, that's fine. And I would give that to him. And I mean, because I think we did this before. What we did is, I think you kept the same PH number and just had us resubmit, I
Right.
think,
You-
without
right.
submitting a new application and
yeah,
a new,
yeah.
yeah, I'm certainly fine with that.
I think it gives
And-
the commission and the client a better sense that they're just getting all brand new plans
Right.
tonight.
I mean, I think in terms of the questions that the commission had and public had were sort of, I think I'm close to at least being able to give you an answer. Whether you like the answer or not, that's
Right.
another thing, but at least I'm able to give you a coherent answer. But I don't think my clients would have any objections, so with that authority, and with that representation that we could refile without a fee or something, I'm good. I'm good with that.
Well,
So are they.
if you want to talk with them, then,
Actually, not necessary. We actually have spoken about this issue.
oh,
Okay, so that they were aware that this might
I
come.
tried to give them a heads up.
He kind of gave me a heads up. And actually, I was, in all honesty, I was actually sort of more reticent than they were because, you want to complete it at some
Oh, I
point.
know,
Yeah,
but
no, and
we do too, but.
honestly, I understand, Mr. Chairman. So if the commission is willing to do that, we're certainly willing to withdraw and
I'll-
refile it and,
I'll ask
start the
them in a
clock
minute.
ticking again, if you will. And I guess when would we do the hearing on second meeting in April?
Well,
not the
what
5th?
what we would hope is that we would do it 2 weeks after you actually give us all the information, so
Okay.
that the commission's had adequate time. We
Yeah.
like to get the information to the commission 1 week ahead of time, and so
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have a new piece of information, such as a letter from Dr. Welty,
Right.
and
Can work
responsible to the commission, then that ought to be
You can
given
work
to
that
them the
with
week
Roger,
before the
and,
meeting.
We'll
Yeah.
put it on the commission when you're ready.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine,
Put
Mr.
it on the
Chairman.
agenda when you're ready. You got everything. Oh, so are you signing it now, and he would like a vote then, and we'll do the.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll sign it now. If the vote is in favor, I will submit it.
You want to make the motion for
Sure.
me, Mary?
Are we going to put some sort of a deadline on how long they have to reapply? I mean, I don't want this to go on 3 years.
Well, I know, but neither do.
No, I understand that, but things happen, so,
I-
all of us
yeah,
are looking to
Well, I
resolve
think
this.
what he said was, what,
I would say if we, we haven't satisfied that by the 5th, I'll be back here. So you could, I mean,
Even okay with 3 months, but it just,
no, yeah, we want it, I need it done,
Right.
I want it done.
Right.
So we're not looking to drag it out. We're looking to sort of, my goal is to get everything, I mean, Roger's got a new set of plans. We've got the updated drainage calculations, which were the 2 big items.
Right, we gave now
Right.
to the commission tonight.
So those were the 2 big. Now it's just sort of the little filler in stuff. And not much of that is actually left. We got a letter from fire, we got a letter from police. We got something from water, we got something from sewer. I need a report from Dr. Welty, and I'm just, there might be some little fill-ins, but I can't. We're looking for something actually from the Board of Ed, because, as part of the
Impact analysis.
impact statement, you want to know, is it affected? We have an old one, we're just asking them, can they update it? The old one may in fact work, to be honest with you, because it says, this many units will have 0 impact on the school system. Can't imagine that's changed in 9 years, In
The
fact,
discussion that we had the other
Right.
day was, for example, I know one commissioner said that in the Dr. Welty's report, it talked about things that ought to be done first, and I asked you to figure out what those things were, and would you actually be doing them first? And I know you didn't have an answer yet. So I mean, those are the types of things that if commissioners have questions,
Yeah.
it's important, as you said, you to at least get them the answers.
Right.
And if they don't have the answers and we have to close the public hearing and then you can't provide anything and they don't have the answers, it's not in your best interest to move forward.
Right, and I certainly agree with that. So again, I've actually filled this out already while we were
Okay,
talking, so I'm good.
then what's your anticipated date?
I would anticipate that, I would anticipate we'd file within 30 days. I actually want to do it sooner, but file within 30 days so that we can,
Okay, and that gives
get it
us
scheduled.
time for checking and so forth, okay.
Right, again, you all have a new set of plans. If Roger has some issues.
Yeah,
I'm willing to give them 90 of
yeah, well, it is.
because it's out of your hands.
All right, but this,
I would say this,
And actually give him a time if he wants to
no.
withdraw, but if, oh yeah, okay, you'll waive your fees for 90 days.
Off on waiving the fee for up to 4 months.
right. Listen, that's fine.
well, okay.
I mean,
well, that one didn't go in it, yeah.
or at least let me come back if I may have a reason why I haven't filed in 3 months. You know what I'm saying?
Give you the time.
Right, exactly.
Welke, you can't control when he's going to get back to you.
No, but, what I'd like to do is, I mean, I'll talk to Roger, but we've given you the main stuff. I'd like to start the clock ticking because I just don't want it to sit.
All right, well, let's do that
So-
then, and then if you run into trouble, we'll do it then.
I can always come back and,
Okay,
say I need another 2 months
whoever's gonna
or
make the
something.
motion, you understand what we've asked? Gonna make it?
Right,
We
and
move-
allow me to refile within,
I move to accept the withdrawal without prejudice of the application to be resubmitted at a
And
future
not-
date.
And keep the fees.
Oh, and waive the fees
For up to 120 days.
for up to 120 days.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Okay, unanimous.
It might be good to just put on the record that the reason you're doing this is to allow the applicant to fully
Yes.
answer the questions of the commission.
Right, when he comes back in, you will give us a
Well, that's
complete,
part of the minutes that
concise
she's taking down,
application,
yeah.
Roger.
do you need
Right,
it?
I just want to put that in the record, so it's
Yeah.
not like
Well,
you're
it'll be in the
just-
minutes,
Just
Roger.
as a question, do we need anything on the record that allows the prior record to sort of carry into this?
Well, we would do that when we open the next
Okay,
hearing.
thank
We'll
you.
just
Okay.
incorporate
I make them,
everything.
or somebody will make the motion to include the records from previous. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. New business, public hearing, 2868, 472 Taylor Road. Secretary, please take the roll and read the legal notice.
The Enfield Planning and Zoning Commission will hold public hearing on Thursday, March 15th at 7 p.m. in the Town Hall Council Chambers, 820 Enfield Street, Enfield, Connecticut, concerning the following application. Public hearing 2868, 472 Taylor Road, reinstatement and request for phasing for the Shaker Heights Senior Residential Development and Subdivision. Ken Picoy and Sons Construction, Inc., owner applicant, map 11, lot 245, residential zone R44. Dated this third day of March 2018. Charles Duran, chairman. Charles Duran.
Here.
Charles Ladd.
Here.
Mary Scott.
Here.
Virginia Higley.
Here.
Ken Nelson.
Here.
Linda DeGray.
Here.
Sarah Gruber.
Here.
Guillermo Salazar.
Here.
Rich Suzak is here.
Okay, is the applicant here? Name and address, please, and,
Sits in for absent.
I'm sorry?
Doesn't Alarmo sit in for the absent commissioner?
Yes. Commissioner Salazar will be sitting in for the absent commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, this is basically a housekeeping situation where you approved this this subdivision, and then for various reasons the applicant was not able
Microphone
to.
on.
The applicant was not able to complete the post-commission approval work, and for their own management purposes, in discussing with them, it made sense for them to come back. Originally, they wanted to take on the entire, what was not built, as one phase, all doing it once. They have now requested to do it in 4 phases, so you have a phasing map. I think that's the only thing we gave you. And the resolution that the staff is recommending is that that you reinstate the approval, and that you approve a 4-phase plan, which would replace the original, what was called Phase 2, which was to do all of the houses at once as Phase 2 of Shaker Heights. So if I've explained that, Kurt, to your satisfaction, or you can add or subtract.
I
whatever you want.
would like to add to it. Lawrence Lloyd, 289 Main Street, Wilbraham, Mass. So I'd like to explain why we're back here. In July 2017, we submitted an application for a modification of the special permit for Shaker Heights. We understood that that would require some bonds to be posted as part of that process. We were operating under the assumption that we would assume the bond position of the original developer. He had 3 cash bonds in place, $20,600 total. About 3 weeks after we received approval, we got a notice from the engineering department here in town saying that there would be different bond requirements, and the bond requirements went to 2 surety bonds totaling $478,000 and another cash bond of $17,050. Now, this was already on top of an agreement that Ken Picoy, who's behind me over here, made with the commission during our discussion on the application, whereby he agreed that he would not be able to pull permits on the remaining 25% of home sites until the top coat of the road was finished. So suddenly we had quite a bit of our capital encumbered, and we're faced with going out to get some large-scale bonds, which quite frankly we're not used to doing. So we did go out into the bond market. We pulsed the people that we normally work with. Typically the bonds we put in place are very low, and it's a very easy process. This proved to be anything but that. During the due diligence process, the bonding company asked us for audited financial statements. We don't do audited financial statements. Financial statements are compilation, review level, or audit. We do review level. So this proved to be a difficult hurdle to get over. So we continued to work with the bonding company. They sent an inspector out to the property. The inspector looked around and then came back to me and said, "We don't understand the requirement of why this bond is so large. You've got infrastructure that's nearly complete and completely stable soil conditions over there. Why is the town asking for this?" I said, the engineering department said they calculated square footage over there, applied a number to the square footage, and said this is what the bond requirement was. We spent some time with Roger, with engineering, trying to get that reduced to no luck, with no luck. So we pressed on, and because we could not produce the audited financial statements, the bond company then came back and said, well, we'll do this, but we want additional collateral. And I said, okay, what form? They said, we want an irrevocable letter of credit from your bank on a dollar-for-dollar basis relative to the surety bonds we will be issuing. So another $478,000 encumbered from our working capital. This was really problematic. The bank sends someone out to look at the property. They're used to, dealing with bonds on development loans they make. And they came back and said the same thing. Don't understand why this is so high. And quite frankly, if we give the bank or the bonding company this irrevocable letter of credit, we've basically eliminated any risk they have. And I agreed to that. I said, you're right. So here we are, the three of us, dancing for the fall around how do we get this resolved, the bond company, the bank, and us, trying to figure out a path forward. So we were required to record the permit by October 20th. So I was here. Roger said, go ahead and do that. And he said, I'll give you 4 more days to get the bonds put in place. Well, the 24th came, and I couldn't do that. So we came back and asked for an extension of time to get the bonds put in place. That was granted. But quite frankly, we were unable to get the bonds put in place that quickly. So basically, the permit, I guess, lapsed. And what we're back asking for tonight is a reinstatement of the bond and to approve the construction phasing that we talked about. The construction phasing will help with the bond. The first phase we're proposing, which is in green on the plan that we've submitted, is 9 homes on Copley Circle. That will cut the bond total down to $110,000, $112,000. Much more palatable to the bond company. They have agreed to the bond subject to a review of additional collateral. So I'm still fighting over that piece. So what I'm asking is, would you do those two things, reinstate the permit, approve the plan? I'd also like to know if there's any consideration that can be made to reduce the bond total here, because essentially we've got, these stable soil conditions over there. We're not going to go in and unearth 39 foundation holes in this process. At most, we'd work on 6, 7, maybe 8 at any one time, and really have found this difficult to get through.
Commissioners?
I don't have any problem with the extension, unless I've missed something, but we have no control over engineering's setting of bonds. And you would have to work with them if you want it reduced.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't.
I understand that, but consider our position. So Mark Sparandio put up 3 cash bonds totaling $20,600. We're required, we have $1 million encumbered. For every dollar he put up, we're putting up 50. Very difficult to operate that way.
I understand.
We have no idea why that was required or anything.
We don't have anything from the engineer with
We have nothing to do with the bonds.
And, the other thing I was curious about is, are you going to file an amended subdivision map so that it matches in the town, the land records?
Well, we can file the plan that we submitted there.
Okay. Did you file the original one?
No, the subdivision doesn't change. It's just the phasing of how they construct it.
So the subdivision that he came before us in 2017 is on the land records?
Right. You authorized the filing when we came before you and explained the situation a few months ago. You authorized the filing and gave him an extension of time, but then the extension of time ran out, and we've been trying to work with the gentleman, and this seemed to be the best way to address it was. If it goes faster than they think, the good news is I'm told that there are 4 pre-deposits already out there of people who are looking to buy this, houses there. So if you got phase 1 and it's 9 houses, we're halfway there already. The commission can release the bond and roll it over to the second phase as you go. So what this does is we divided it up And so instead of $500,000, it's $125,000 each time. We did sit with engineering, and they sat with engineering, and they had folks sit with engineering, and it was reviewed. And the process that is used by engineering is the same bond calculation process as is used for Mayfield and others. So it's consistent.
Thank you. Now, would we make, if indeed we decide to extend it, do we have to extend it back to the date that it expired?
Well, the resolution the resolution in front of you simply reinstates what you had approved before, which the only reason it lapsed is because they didn't file the bonds in a timely manner. So and it substitutes 4 phases for 1, and it keeps in effect all other conditions of approval.
Ken?
You said that the bond, you compared it to Mayfield, or engineering compared it to Mayfield, and it's pretty uniform across the board. If I was the buyer of this subdivision and the seller had $20,000 in bonds, I came to the town to switch it into my name, and they put it to $400,000?
No, well, I understand what the gentleman said, but you got to understand that original approval was for multiple phases, and there were phases. The bonds were posted by the gentleman who built the what's built out there now. He built them in phases, and they were released in phases. And so what you were looking at was what the original developer told these folks were still in effect. It was not the total of the bonding on that project.
So the original developer did it in phases, only bonded a phase.
And this is what he's now saying, well, I'll do it in phases.
Okay. It's just, Pecoy Homes has been around a long time. They were involved in Extreme Makeover. They're a very good business partner in the community.
Right,
and
sure.
I want to help them move forward. This subdivision's been going on for years. I'm glad to see them take it over.
And we were too, and that's why we're here tonight, trying to...
That's why I said he built that veterans house in Suffolk.
Right. I just want to see them get help, whatever they have to do to move forward with this subdivision.
And I can also tell you that the building department has agreed, as something else we did. The gentleman actually came in today with 2, which sort of was ahead of the gun. But normally what would happen is that after you approve this tonight, there's probably another 30 days of getting everything in place. And so I talked to the building official, and he's going to start the process of reviewing their building permits, and so that he won't actually issue them until we get everything finalized after tonight. So we've saved them, another month in time there. So I thought that was good.
And is the town seem to be helping assist you to get up and going with this,
Yeah,
or hinder you?
very helpful, except for the bond
For the
requirement.
bond,
We
yeah.
just find that very onerous, quite frankly.
Okay.
And that's a big deal for us.
Absolutely it is.
Oh,
I
yeah.
understand that. Okay. Thank you.
And before you vote, I have some questions I'd like you to answer, so that I have said these things before you do that. Do I have to re-record the permit, will be one question. Is there going to be another appeal period after tonight's vote? And then finally, I'm not finished with the bond negotiation. How long do we have to get the bonds in place this time? And maybe we could put a deadline on that.
Roger?
Well, the standard, what the commission's been doing is giving you 90 days. Is that going to be sufficient?
To put the bonds in place?
Yeah.
Yes, that's sufficient. Thank you.
Because I know you want to get your buildings up and going as soon as possible.
Yeah.
This is a reinstatement as opposed to a new approval, so that's a good question you raised. I don't believe there's an appeal period on it.
Okay.
Because this commission is really curing a post-approval defect as opposed to, but I'm not an attorney, but if you're not going to get your bonds in place anyhow, it's a 15-day, so I'm not sure who's going to appeal it.
Okay.
Actually, several residents came in, and they were all pleased to see that
Oh,
you were
yeah,
moving forward. So I don't know if anybody's opposed to it. What was your third question?
Do we have to re-record the permit?
No.
Okay. By the way, the advanced deposits are not in Phase 1. They're all up in Phases 2 and 3, so it's going to be some time till we build those homes.
Hopefully not. Well, then if you're set,
That was my only question, what phase they were in.
Chair will entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve public hearing 2868 472 Taylor Road, the draft resolution. What? Oh, do we need to open it to the public before we do
Let me
anything?
see, is it a public hearing?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyone in
I
the public would
withdraw
like
that.
to speak in favor or against this application? Sorry. Anyone in the public would like to speak in favor or against this application? Last call to speak in favor or against the application. Okay, Mary.
I'd like to put forth a motion to approve public hearing 2868 472 Taylor Road. In a draft resolution dated March 15th, 2018, that was put together by the Planning Department with, let's take a look, we have 28 conditions, and that is it.
There's also a couple of
Second.
phasing conditions that they
But it's
added.
in here, it's in the draft resolution, so.
Second.
Well, that's why she's included the whole, yeah. Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous.
Thank you.
This time, I hope we get going.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Now I'll get this one right. This one is a site plan review. 95 High Street. Serapi's Restaurant, is the applicant here? What do we do, Roger?
Mr. Chairman, what we have here is the health department today sent over a memorandum, but they have approved Serapi's to do is to offer breakfast from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. only at this time. So if you are so inclined, then we would ask you to consider approving that. There is still additional
What
work.
did you said, Roger, just breakfast and what?
7 to 3.
What the memorandum we received at actually 4:45 this afternoon from the health department is that they are okay with a food license to operate at Molina's site, because they're also going to continue to operate at their existing site, serving breakfast from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. So what you actually had before you was a request for a full-service restaurant, such as Molina's was,
Well,
and
that's
then
the-
at some future point, liquor as well. But they're not at the point where they can do that yet. So,
this is an incomplete application that we
well,
have.
you know, and I'm trying to
Could
figure
be
out,
that.
because originally we were saying, well, it's a restaurant replacing a restaurant. Could it be an administrative approval? So I guess if you were so inclined, you could authorize me to give them a permit for breakfast from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then when they get their everything in lined up with the health department, they can come back for their full service.
That's what we talked about today.
Yeah,
because
and they also could.
The
It
liquor
would be
permit,
the
that's
liquor
crazy.
permit at the same time. So if you were so inclined, I would say grant the director of planning the authority to sign off for breakfast 7 a.m. to 3. And then when they're ready with the health department and their liquor permit, they could come back for their
Well,
full operation.
they had to pay for this too? I mean, because it's stupid to waste our time and yours and everybody else's,
I thought
where they
already-
wanted to go 7 to 10, and they wanted to go, the application is 7 to 10, Monday through Sunday, and a future liquor license, which I asked you.
Well,
why-
the only other choice would be if you wanted to
Continue.
approve their full application subject to the approval of the health department. In the past, you haven't wanted to do that.
Well, that's up to the commission. I hate to see them running back and forth.
I thought they were already open for breakfast. That's what it says on Facebook.
They're operating down there, yeah, yes.
It's an existing
I know, so why don't we just hold what they have until,
I know, that's why I said
I was surprised to see this. The liquor license, yes. But unless they're
Oh, we
putting
have
Oh, a
in,
liquor
Transfer.
license is a special
right,
permit here.
but
You
unless
hold
they're
a
putting
public
in more
hearing.
seating or knocking down doorways and changing them, I couldn't figure out why they were coming, if they're keeping the same hours.
Well, I don't, yeah, right, but even their plans were drawing, the seats are not the way the seats are in there, so I don't know if they're changing the seating or not.
I think we should just continue this.
It's the same to me.
They're out this way, though.
No, they're not the same.
They're making changes from the
I
Molinas.
know, but the drawings aren't right. If they switch them that way, then fine, but they're losing space. But, so that's up to the commission. If you want to give them that, up to, subject to the.
Well, generally,
Health Department?
the protocol has been, and you're free to change it, because it's,
I know.
is that if you have a favorable report from the fire marshal and the health department, then you will approve a restaurant. If you don't, then you wait for the health department and the fire marshal. So the only thing you have from the health department right now is 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. breakfast, but they did say that they are making good faith efforts to resolve the other issues that there may be with respect to
But if we
opening
don't give it to
full-time.
them, are we closing them down because they don't have
They
it?
have another operation.
They're only allowed to operate right now 7 a.m. to 3 by the health department.
But I understood as well that they continue to operate the existing
Oh, yeah,
Serapis.
their existing operation.
I
yeah.
know,
I
but-
think their goal is at some point to consolidate both operations at Molinas.
But if we don't allow the zoning or the transfer or whatever, the site plan review, are we not allowing them to operate, is all I'm saying.
Well, they can't operate because they have to file the new seating plan and everything else, and their hours of operation, and the regulations don't authorize the director of planning to sign off on that unless I come here and ask for administrative approval.
Well,
It's an
yeah,
existing restaurant now, it's really not changing use, they're rearranging a few things, and that's where I stand.
well,
Do-
that's
do
why
we-
I'm asking. I hate to have them mess around and
Well, I'm new,
with
so
this stuff.
I believe
So I would,
What do
so
we
I
do
would
if the
ask
Board
for a
of Health
motion
says no?
Do we have the
authorize
fire
7 a.m. to
marshal
3
yet?
p.m. breakfast.
Roger, do we have anything from the fire marshal saying he has no
The
concerns?
fire marshal has been over there. He does not have concerns.
But we don't have anything in our
There's
have
packet.
no
nothing in
problem with
writing.
parking.
No, there's no problem with parking.
Do we know why the restriction from the health department?
They submitted an email to us back in January that just said that there were renovations that had to be done before they would authorize it. I can give it to you if you want to read it. It's like 6 items that needed to be taken care of beforehand. And that's why they're saying today that Serapis is making good faith efforts to address those items. So I think we're fine to saying, good, the health department's okay with breakfast, 7 a.m. to 3, planning and zoning's okay with it too. Come back when you got your full requirements met by health department and you want your liquor license. Other than that, good luck.
That's what I say then.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, let's,
So what form of motion?
It's a motion to authorize the director of planning to grant administrative approval for breakfast, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Okay, 7 days a week?
Yeah.
Okay. I so move, and I'm glad that they're,
with the
getting
condition
such-
that they have to
They
come back
have,
for the.
yes, one condition, they have to come back for the entire floor plan and the liquor license, when they're ready.
Second, yeah.
Motion's made second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, that takes care of that. I didn't want to keep going on it, that's all. All right. Public hearing, site plan, discussion, proposed zoning text amendment.
Right, Mr. Chairman, there was an actual formal application that you recall, and the request was that it be workshopped and brought back at a workshop. The applicant asked, since we had a light agenda tonight, if they could have an informal conversation with you. What the concerns that we heard when it was before you before was that there were a lot of conditions in other sections of the regulations with respect to housing that you wanted incorporated. I think they've made an effort to do that. The other concern was you received a list from the Conservation Commission. I'm not sure if Karen LaPlante was speaking for herself or the commission that night, but she gave you a list of many sites in town that were 25 acres. We've reviewed that list, and many of those sites did not meet the criteria. And the criteria has been narrowed so that it's clearer. The criteria is that you need to be at least 25 acres, and you have to have, of the 25 acres, you have to have at least 15 acres residentially zoned. Has to be on water and sewer, and it has to be adjacent to a commercial and industrial area. The other thing we did is we eliminated R88. Because of the comments that we had heard that you'd like to stick to the I-91 corridor. So with that, we can say confidently that there's no more than a half a dozen sites in the town, if that. There's not that entire list that you got. With that, Paul Smith Attorney Smith has been working on it, and Mr. Triano, who was the proponent of the regulation, is here, and you can have your discussion.
Sure. As planner has said, Dr. O'Brien, we've worked with staff to try to we gave you a draft regulation and a formal application, which we, after discussion, withdrew. So we've done a redraft, which is basically a special use permit application with a number of requirements. Oh, I'm sorry. He turned it off on me. Maybe he's trying to tell me something.
I think Frank did, not I.
Yeah, no, he did.
That's teamwork.
But in any event, so we, working with staff, what we did is actually look at the other criteria that were in some of the regulations where you had multifamily allowed, and we sort of tried to pull out of there stuff that would work in the zone we're proposing. I think the emphasis, as the planner has said, is it's got to be a 25-acre parcel, at least 15 acres of which has to be in a residential zone. We eliminated the R88 zone, and basically still has to be on a collector street. Public water and sewer are required. We looked at what you had in your 60-acre zoning regulations with regard to multifamily and adopted some of those criteria those are in C6. We then put also design standards. We obviously have to meet all the site plan requirements, all special use permit, general special use permit requirements, and set forth design standards to give the commission and whoever is interested in developing one of these pieces some flexibility, but it also gives the commission latitude as to whether you think it's a good project and you want to approve it or not. We did take the list that was submitted at our public hearing and have analyzed it, and again, we would agree with the planner. There's probably on that list, there's a lot of, there were 47 different properties. Anything in an I-1 or R88 doesn't qualify. anything under 25 acres doesn't qualify. So that left you with about 10 or 11 parcels. And then we looked at those parcels individually. Most of those in the R44 on that list actually don't abut industrial commercial, which is sort of the requirement here because it's a transition zone issue that we're talking about where you're going from residential to commercial industrial. And so you're left with maybe 3 or 4 that if there was some assemblage might meet the criteria. So it's a pretty sort of limited list. I mean, we weren't necessarily going for that. What we were trying to do is constrain it so it's a transition zone. It's within the corridors of the town, the sort of the busy corridors of the town, along Route 90, along the 190 corridor sort of thing, but not get into rural areas where it's R88, and have it where it's, again, its primary function is to serve as a transitional zone from residential to industrial and commercial.
Just Attorney Smith, you keep saying zone, which you confused me the other day. So it's not a zone. It's not an overlay zone. It's not a zone we're going to land someplace. It's a special permit that you can apply for in any all residential zones but R88, provided it meets all of these other conditions.
Right.
So it isn't like you're coming in for a zone change and then.
Right. It is not. It is not a new zone. We're not creating some other new zone in your regulations, nor are we doing what would be known as an overlay zone, which you would then put on different pieces. It's only really a special use permit allowance, a special use, if you will, if you meet the rather strict criteria of the draft. And again, at this point, it's not a formal application before you. It's a draft before you for discussion purposes. We took our old sort of regulation that we had drafted, and again, trying to take from the conversations we've had with you and working with staff, try to come up with something that we think is closer to what you had envisioned. So we're certainly willing to consider any input and try to redraft it, and if that's necessary in any way, or improve it, or what you think might. And again, this is informal at this point. We're not committed to applying for it or submitting it. You're not obviously committed in any way to approve it.
Right, and so what you're asking the commission for is whether this is
if we're on the right track, I guess.
If this is something that that could go to start and go to a formal application in a public hearing, because as you know, the commission cannot express an opinion on it until it's actually been to public hearing and you've heard all the facts.
Absolutely.
But you could ask questions and talk about what it is that you would like to see in this type of regulation, and if there's something missing, you could provide that guidance to that.
And again, as the planner has said, given the light, we were going to do this at a work session, but given your light schedule tonight, it just seemed to make sense to bring it in and discuss it. It's no different than a work session, I guess.
Because I have a few comments that because I keep hearing that it's a transitional zone from a transitional area. And what comes to mind is that, basically what happens is we have, some kind of a industrial zone, and we're trying to transition to, I guess, residential zone without encroaching upon the residential zones. And I know that we keep talking about having a mixed-use type of development. And what I could envision is some kind of a mixed-use development because of the fact that you have an industrial zone here, and that, this new, large area flexible residential housing area should be actually a mixed zone or mixed area in terms of I can envision having a little bit of retail and a little bit of coffee shops or something to actually enhance or actually make people want to transition or draw in a large volume of residential use, and we keep saying that the millennials don't want to drive, the millennials don't want to do this, but you need something in order to keep them there, and possibly the only thing that you is going to keep them there, or, you know, draw from the neighborhoods and enhance the neighborhoods, or have the neighborhoods feel like they're participating in, you know, this new development, is to have some retail and commercial space, you know, associated with this large flexible residential housing. Because, you know, otherwise it's just going to be housing, you know, and it's really not transitional. It's just housing, and you know, I think that, you know, it has to have some kind of caveat as to, you know, why it should be allowed in a certain area. And, you know, one of the caveats would be that it is serving a purpose in terms of it's providing a coffee house, it's providing, you know, maybe live entertainment, you know, on weekends, and it's actually going to be a vibrant part of the community rather than housing. You know, because I guess what happens is I look at, you know, number one, you know, the size of the units are still smaller than, you know, what we have for the elderly housing, and that's always a concern for me. So, you know, I have again, just a reservation that, you know, we don't want to make these units too small, because, again, I mentioned the fact that the millennials are acquiring, you know, merchandise, and the elderly have already purged all their merchandise. And if you have somebody who's acquiring merchandise, you know, their apartments should not be smaller than people who have already purged all their merchandise that they have. So in terms of, you know, that's my way of thinking. You know, in terms of, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but you know, if you normally you would,
Not a millennial.
you know, because the last thing that you know, I sort of, you know, have to comment on is that, you know, when I look at the density in terms of, if you have 25 acres and it's 16 units per acre, that's 400 units. And if I have 400 units and I look at the parking associated with the 400 units, it would be 2 cars per unit, which is 800 cars. What I did is I did a calculation as to what the size of a parking lot you would need for 800 cars, and that's a significant amount. And typically, you know, a stall for a parking lot for a parking car is about either 19 or 20 feet long and 9 or 10 feet wide. So if I use just round numbers in terms of the 10-foot width with a 20-foot length, and then I include a driveway, which is normally 20 feet for 2 lanes of cars going back and forth, we have, you know, an area of 10 by 60 for 2 cars with, you know, a driveway going through. So if I do that multiplication times 800 cars, it comes out to be, you know, over 5 acres of pavement that you would need to have, you know, 800 cars of parking. And I think that, you know, it's not that we want to create another Macy's, you know, in front of each one of these apartment complexes, or these, you know, large area flexible residential housing. And you know, I could see if we had smaller, you know, units or smaller things broken up so that we don't have, you know, 5 acres of parking surrounding this big, you know, something or another. But, you know, but again, I think that there's a lot of things that we should add so that it has some kind of a purpose and a function, and not necessarily just be, you know, housing for the sake of having housing and calling it another name. And you know, possibly, like you said, if it had some commercial and retail associated with it, and it actually, you know, created its own little community, it seems to me that it would be more, you know, in line of what I think that, you know, we're trying to achieve nowadays in terms of, you know, having some kind of a, you know, commercial, residential, you know, areas that are sort of functioning together, not totally
like a
separate.
store and go shopping. Yeah.
Submit your notes prior to the meeting.
Yeah, so we can follow along.
I think one of your points, Rich, was, you know, whether there would be other uses there, and I think this draft, although it's not final, differs from the prior one because it says that will permit uses on the non-residential zone portions consistent with the regulations. So to me, that implied that anything in the industrial portion of that entire parcel could be used for industrial purposes, or at least anything permitted under the industrial purposes. I don't know if that's the intent of this proposed text.
Again, what you're talking about is not really a transition zone. If you're talking about the concept I hear from you, and I've worked on this, is, you know, like stores or shops, restaurants on the bottom and apartments on the top, sort of like a blue-back square kind of thing, as an extreme example, where you have shops on the bottom and apartments on the top. That's not this vision. This vision is really sort of, if you take Mr. Triano's piece, it's to the east, it's residences. Then his piece is some odd acres, 17 acres of residential, then transitions into commercial, then transitions into industrial. So the idea is how do you work with that piece? You can build houses right up to the the commercial industrial line, but that really doesn't make a lot of sense from our perspective. So the idea is, yeah, you really do want to transition, and if you find these in the right areas of town where you're near, the mall, shopping, restaurants, yeah, no, it works fairly well. So the idea is not to build sort of like a neighborhood. The idea is to allow a transition, and housing for the sake of housing, I'm not sure what that means, but housing generally I think is a good thing, because if you're not building housing, not building your population and growing, then you're going the other way. Towns, communities they're not static. They don't sort of stick in one place. They're either expanding or contracting in some fashion. That's just the way communities happen, the way cities go. They're either vibrant in building or they're in some ways.
But I think that
so the idea that housing for the sake of housing is a bad thing, I don't think so.
But I think the tendency nowadays is to try to incorporate multi-uses associated with developments, rather than be just static and saying this is going to be housing over here, and this is going to be commercial over here, and this is going to be housing over here, and this is going to be commercial, and the two shall never meet one another. And I think that what has to happen is that in order for a community to be a community, people have to have some place to meet and greet and talk to one another. Otherwise, you're just driving into a driveway, you go up to your apartment, you come down from your apartment, you get into your car, and you drive out. But if there's a coffee house, if there's something else, some amenity there that would keep people sort of together, where you get to meet your neighbor and you greet your neighbor, other than the fact that you're going to pass them in a hall, and and how do you develop relationships like that? And I think that communities need to develop relationships, and we can build housing where you're isolated from your neighbors and you don't necessarily have to talk to your neighbors, and you can just pass in the hallway, or you can build a community that interacts with one another and it have some kind of a purpose and a way to interact with one another. And I think that to me is something that we should be striving to do, because that's how you sort of develop a certain of sense and a certain of pride of what you're doing or where you live and who you are and who your neighbors are. Otherwise, you're just passing each other on the street.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain areas of town maybe that the idea of sort of a mixed use within buildings, mixed use within concentrated areas may work. I mean, our vision wasn't quite that, because again, what we see are several things, as we said to the commission. First of all, there's a demand for sort of different type of housing in town and in the area, some of which is, when you talk about millennials, is apartments, multifamily, sort of the non-traditional vision of, buy a starter home and that's what you do, is live in sort of a single, a single family home. And so, everything you read, everything we see, everything we would present to the commission sort of says, and there was an article in the Current a week or so ago, the need for, this sort of kind of housing, and a need for a diverse housing stock, which many towns in Connecticut aren't providing. So we feel like it, as we said when we had the initial hearing, fills, our plan fills some of that gap. It doesn't sort of run wild and let multifamily just sort of go wherever it wants in town. It's got to be well thought out and well planned. There's a lot of requirements even in this draft regulation. So, I mean, that's sort of the idea.
If I could just point to, for the commissioner, number 6, it talks about the range of things that need to be there that the commission would be looking at. I mean, if there are other things you wanted to add or subtract to that, but it talks about community facilities.
Well, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and again, it also talks about open space and the fact that, you're going to devote, 1,000, square feet per dwelling unit. But again, I think I want to emphasize the fact that, we don't want to get open space that's just wetlands and escarpment soils and things like that. We want open space that, is actually open space that could be usable, and you can incorporate some of your services or range of services that you're going to have into that open space, but recognizing that the open space can't be wetlands and escarpments, that's not usable.
Well, that's up to you when the map would come in, whether you accept it or not.
I got a question. Or
Kenny.
So, looking at this right now, this very conversation probably happened 70 years ago when Manning Road was developed with the commercial in the back. Now, I know this particular property, there's a towing company that runs 24 hours a day, and they do rollovers at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they have to hand unload the trucks on the highway. So there's tons of trucks going in and out and cars. And are we going to be sitting here in 5 years when the residents of this subdivision or apartments come to us and complain that they're next to an industrial commercial area?
There's also the car.
Well, it's all around it, but I just know that particular business.
Are we using that as an example of one parsable parcel?
Yeah, because we really don't need to be identifying a specific, because that's not the way it works. Not the way we should go through it.
He didn't.
It is commercial on one side, industrial, residential. You're going to have the same issue you have on Manning Road coming, and that's something that we really need to address. And, without being site-specific, how do you address that? And then as far as Rich was saying about the open space, I've said it before at the last meeting, open space should be a playground, a recreation facility for the children to play or something like that, not a swamp full of mosquitoes.
If you read that, though, that's what it says here.
Well,
They're going to have hiking trails, they're going to have scenic area.
It's not required.
Well, not required. It's they're asking it
They're
to
options.
include those things in
That's all
it
stuff we'd ask for.
if we wanted.
well, I have some suggestions on that one section, as we did with Mayfield. They're required to take, I don't know how many out of the list, and this one doesn't have that, but I suggested already to Roger that it be a certain number, which is what you can pick, that they must do, I don't know, 5 out of the 10 or 6 out of the 10 or whatever. But that's the way we wrote it for Mayfield. They had to do.
Yeah, the conversation I had with these folks with respect to that list, and I was reading that in your 60-acre zone, I mean, if you look at the 10 items on there and you said you have to do 4, well, I mean, you could do a planting area and a picnic area and a putting green and like a trail, or you got an outdoor pool, an indoor pool, a sports court, or a fitness center building. So it didn't seem to me that that was, just to say that you had to do 4 of those things. And that's why this thing says a range. So, I mean, any other way you want to write it, that makes sense. But I had trouble understanding the one that would apply to your 60-acre zone because of the way it said 4 out of the 10, but you could pick 4 easy ones. So that's why we wrote it to say the commission would determine if it was an appropriate range. I mean, you could say up to, at least 4, and you decide what they were. I was just concerned about somebody says, well, I met the requirement because I got a putting green.
Right, no, we didn't allow them at Mayfield to do that either. I don't know how that's written.
Well, Roger, so basically what you're saying to me is, and from what I'm reading from this, is that the multifamily housing development that we have already in our requirements, in our regulations, this is just basically lessening the acreage that is required to build homes, and then also doing this transitional commercial, industrial as residential. And then the next thing is, there are things in here that were more specific in our regulations that aren't specific here. And I think that if you're scaling back some of this has to be scaled back a little bit too, because, I mean, you're talking, one references the 60 acres, this is only 25. So, I mean, really, when you're looking at it, I don't know if all of that is something we should have there necessarily. But I do agree, maybe not 4, but maybe 3. You know, or we do put
Yeah, and
something
that's
in there
totally
like
up to
that.
the commission. That's why we were trying to say an appropriate range, because depending on what it was, I mean, if somebody's got 15 acres, you're right, there's going to be a smaller development.
Exactly.
If they want to come in with 40 acres, that's going to maybe a bigger thing. And depending on, you know, what it is, where it's located, and whether it's next to a commercial area that has coffee shops already, or it isn't, if it's next to the industrial area. And then when you come in on your special permit, that's where you're going to look at, is the abutting industrial use using the same access road? What's the buffer area in between? Because you still have your required buffers. I mean, the buffer area between a commercial, an industrial, and a residential is what, 100 feet?
100 feet.
It's 100 feet, and so if you did have 100 feet fully screened, and you had a different access route, but you know, then that would be the place that you would address that. But I am mindful of what the commissioner said, because I'm remembering Boston Post Road in the town of Orange, and the Boston Post Road is a commercial corridor, and the town built elderly housing right behind it. And then what happened was the folks complained about the trucks beep, 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 picking up the trash. And so, yes, we have to be mindful and be aware of those things and address them. But I do think you have ways to address them.
I have a,
Also, the quality of construction makes a difference. 'Cause
Right, and
You
whether
look
you
at-
put soundproof windows in or not.
you look at.
I mean, I had a restaurant in Hartford in which the residents upstairs were complaining that they were living over a restaurant with a band. And it's sort of like, well, you know, if you're going to move into a
They have the
restaurant,
apartments
an
downtown
apartment
right next
over
to
a
the train
restaurant with a
tracks, they don't even
band,
hear
I
'em.
mean. But on the other hand, if you had enough insulation in between the floors and the windows were soundproof, then you would have. Right now in Blueback Square, the condominium folks are complaining about the street life down on the street. So there's always going to be a certain amount.
Yeah, I mean,
The other question too for me is the density, because you have 16 units per acre,
Right.
and even under our multifamily ones, we only do 10 dwelling units per acre. So that's something to look at that we really need to be, you know, aware of if that's,
Yep.
we're doing smaller acreage and we're actually putting in more density. So that's just something to, and I'm not sure if that was something that was specific to
that
what
was
you
actually a
wanted.
criteria we took off of one of the existing ones. So and I know it's difficult, we sort of cut and paste to a certain degree to try to, so, no, I understand that, and I've got that down.
I
as
had
an
a
issue.
few.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a few comments on this. One was, as compared to the proposed zoning text change that was before the commission at one point, well, there's still the typo in B that says compromises 25 acres, but should be comprised. I think my next comment was in C sub 5.
Compromises.
Your mic on, Sarah?
Oh, yeah. I
Yes,
got it.
it's on.
It is.
C sub 5, I would want that to be and/or, so outdoor recreational facilities including but not limited to those things, and/or, because that would suggest that you could have more than one of each of those things, although I don't think it matters.
Okay.
Another comment was C sub 10 about open space. Our regulations in other areas in the multifamily and also in the subdivision regulations had much more detailed requirements about the open space, which I think has been a concern of this commission relating to the text that we're looking at, including making it usable, what types of things would be there. And so I would agree with Commissioner Scott that this just feels like the multifamily regulation we currently have, but just cut down to size and with less actual requirements. So I would add more specificity to the open space portion of it. At least that's what I might want. I didn't like, just looking at this, basements or cellars shall not be required but are not precluded, especially when there's, again, comparing this to the cut and pasted areas from the actual multifamily regulations we have. I would want either storage or a basement or cellars, but this leaves open the possibility that you'd have neither, and then residents are left without anything that they can use for space. That's a concern of mine.
That was one, yes, that
What's that?
storage must be, I was going to put it in definitely.
Right, yeah, I would want it in there.
Storage must be provided for residents, period.
Absolutely. And
We
so,
had it in 6 as one of those
right, but
lists, but
you don't
I
need it.
understand what you're saying.
So I would want some form of storage, either mandatory.
No, I mean, that's not an amenity, putting it in I and J. That's definitely required.
That's a requirement. That's what I would
Because
want.
we require, every zone, we require basements, period. There's nothing built in town nowadays without a basement. One slipped by, but
So I have a comment.
Hold on,
and-
I just have a few more. May I
Wait,
finish?
oh,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I'm looking at C sub 12. I didn't quite understand this is the commission will permit uses on the non-residential zone portions consistent with the regulations. I didn't quite understand the intent of that. If the intent was that in the industrial zoned portion of this parcel, you'd continue to conduct industrial uses, and then you'd still have your residential, then this isn't really a transitional zoning at all. I guess I don't understand the purpose of that paragraph 12, because it just suggests that this is not just a residential type of text here. You're saying everything else continues. And I guess along those lines, this doesn't feel like a transitional text to me, because we already have the buffer zones contained in the regulations saying there's at least 100 feet. And so this doesn't do any more, and arguably it does less, because it suggests that this is a different regulation. So I would either want to preserve those buffer zones in the regulation and say, if this truly is transitional housing, add more. Or this isn't really transitional housing at all, because you're just saying I can put in a high-density multifamily development right next to an industrial zone, and it's no different than if we would have allowed it anyway. Just a few more, I'm sorry. C sub 14, this is on page 3. Sidewalks shall be as required or just required? I would suggest required, I like them.
Yes.
For D, design standards, again, I think relating to what Commissioner Scott said, I like the ones that we had in our regulations about multifamily, 4.70.6D, like laundry, mail, garages. So to that end, there really aren't any design standards in here, because what's listed under this design standards section is just how many lots we can build.
as I recall.
And then my last, I guess, overall comment is that the prior text that was before this commission had this proposed zoning text change nestled under 4.70, which would add this to, or require an applicant seeking to develop something under that to comply with the opening paragraphs of 4.70. So that would include the procedures under 4.70.1, submission requirements of 4.70.2, and the criteria in 4.70.3. But this, not proposed language, but language we're looking at right now, is under an entirely new subsection. So to me, that would take that out of the requirements of 4.70 and take out some of the control and submission requirements that we would require for the multifamily housing district that currently exists. So I would want that back under 70. Thank you.
My comment was, if we can allow construction under special use permit, do we really need to modify all of our regulations to accommodate this? Because it seems like we already have all the regulations that we need.
Well, the only place that you allow multifamily that isn't targeted to age restriction is for 60 acres or more that was in effect as of a date many years ago. You couldn't assemble land or anything else. And so what this does is would, if it emerges in some form, would allow smaller sites to come before you and apply. But you would have to, in your use table, we would have to put in each of the use table for each of the zones, residential zones other than R88, that this section applies, subject to these conditions. But you just can't list a bunch of special permits and say, well, we can do it by special permit.
Okay.
You also had the typo that's on water and sewer. It should say be it connected to water and sewer. Guillermo pointed that out to me earlier.
C sub 2.
And under item 2, public water, public sewer, and gas if available, which would be left out. And I know the gas companies are looking to extend their lines.
I have another quick comment, which Commissioner Gruber brought up because it was something that I was looking at as well, and that's the buffer zones. We have to be it's really important if we are going to have kind of land that is commercial and industrial, that we definitely have to have what our buffer requirements are in here, as well as probably something a little bit more in order to deal with some of the transitions into these different areas. So I really think that's an important piece as well. So
Especially towards the commercial field.
Well, sort of what we did with that is give you guys the leeway. In C9, what we said is you determine if the buffer is adequate.
As I remember, when we originally started talking about this, the transition was really to have office and commercial space on the half of the lot that was by industrial, to be a buffer from housing to commercial to industrial. So it isn't a straight transition to industrial.
There was commercial in between, yeah.
Right.
That was the
But that doesn't apply, that scenario is not addressed by this text at all.
I know,
Because
but
it
this is
says
what we
industrial and residential.
Right,
That's not
I-
the scenario.
Talked about.
But if you want that in there, then that's the guidance that you should provide.
That's what would make it a transitional thing, as I remember. That's how.
And then you wouldn't have the industrial use right next door.
Well, that's what we were talking, I think Rich is saying in between is have a small
It
store.
doesn't have to be restaurants, though. It can be offices, can be anything.
Yeah.
Right, right. And I guess that's what I'm saying is that, in terms of it could be medical offices or whatever, but, something that would be a focal point rather than, just somebody driving in, parking a car, going up to the apartment, coming down and leaving. That it needs something there to give
Well,
it.
the-
Restaurants and stuff like that.
I just,
Low end.
I don't see that though, because the only thing that this zoning text would do to address that is ensure that whoever's operating whatever's next door is also owning the apartments or the townhouses or whatever they may end up being.
Well, that's the way it was originally set up.
Right, but
Yeah, it was a business section next.
right, but
next-
that's not the scenario, and it just ensures that it's the same owner. It doesn't ensure that the owner actually puts something there. And it still also doesn't address the compatibility of the adjoining uses here, which is what it says is the purpose here for transitions. And so I would be careful with that, because you still have, as we said, the Manning Road scenario where trucks coming in and out. And then for the parking, I just thought of, well, I had it written down, but the parking, I would want, I think, at least 2 per unit, but designated ones. And if there are industrial uses still occurring on the industrial portion of the parcel, that the industrial portion of the parcel have its own separate parking that is not combined with the resident parking, because we don't want, again, the compatibility of the adjoining uses to be an issue.
Well, I think originally, if you have seniors, you aren't going to have the same number of cars they're going to be driven because a lot of them aren't using automobiles.
This isn't a senior
And
housing.
that's why,
Right.
that's
But this
why
isn't-
you
This
you
isn't
want the
senior.
transitional coffee shops or stores or something that these people can walk to.
Well,
Part of it.
transitional.
I know.
Transitional too is to distance you from that 24-hour business to somebody who's sleeping, whether it's offices that, they come in, they work 9 to 5, they go home. And other than that, I would require the buffer to be 5 times what it is right now. So in essence, we could give them the option, you could leave it as a buffer, or you can put some lesser use and tone it down to residential. Otherwise, there's nothing there because we're creating the same scenario that we just heard. So, and that's what transitional is. That's how I see it, whether it's a doctor's office, bookkeeping service, or, a community house for the project, something that is not going to be occupied at night, and it also acts as a shield between any industrial or commercial and the residential. Swimming pool, indoor pool, rec facilities, tennis courts, or
That's the problem
offices.
with Enfield is trying to fit something into our places because of the way it's developed.
I understand that, but instead of, having a huge buffer, you could fill this buffer, allow them to use the buffer
As the open
for,
space. As the
not
open
as
space,
open space.
Well, the dedicated portions, like the
Right,
playground, the things
yes.
that they're identifying as
Yeah.
outdoor recreational
right.
facilities.
Open space is the town of Enfield's land that should be usable for the entire community, and you shouldn't have to need a canoe to walk on it. So, but I'd be okay with a transitional space, and this does not meet that as far as I have to agree with Sarah.
So you'd want language in there that specifies what the separating distance is between residential and commercial and industrial, and it would have to specify what you would contemplate as approving in there, what would be appropriate.
I understand, Roger, but not being site-specific. If he's building in the middle of woods and there's nobody around him, nowhere, even though it's commercial or industrial, he's the first one in play there. Then the people filling in around him should have to accommodate him.
I'm thinking about how to draft the regulation that gets to where you want to go, which is to specify
And that's why when I started getting a little specific on the site, I understand, but
So
he
we
has
have
a
to
particular-
envision, what I'm saying, I'm trying to work with you here, and I'm trying to say, well, okay, let's envision everything that could be in the commercial and industrial zone, and what would be appropriate things to be the transition between that and the
Right.
housing.
And I think some ways to do that that's not currently in our zoning regulations that I know of is thinking of the Manning Road scenario to say to the extent that the parcel has a commercial industrial zone, that any businesses served on that zone are serviced by a separate road that do not cross the path. There are ways, I think, to address the problems of the uses being next to one another. One of them is roads. One of them is specifying a buffer zone or saying what types of less intense uses that are not for dwellings are in that buffer zone. So I think there are several ways to do it. And part of it, I think, has to do with parking. Part of it could be if a business use or industrial use has hours of operation that exceed 10 p.m., maybe this isn't for this district. I don't know. But there are a number of very specific ways to actually make it transitional and required in the regulations rather than leave it to and the commission will determine in its discretion, because it's really hard when an applicant comes and spends a lot of time putting something together and then we're stuck here saying, oh, do we use our catch-all powers to say no, when what we really want is for it to be a requirement to begin with. I think that's the problem with these the stuff we're looking at today.
Yeah, of course, the other part of that is the more detail you have, and you can do that, but then it becomes sort of inflexible in some way, right? And the idea is,
But it gives you a roadmap.
You try to give a
So-
design that the commission likes, and then they sort of tweak that design or ask for more. We want a bigger buffer, or we want limited hours, which you can do under a special use
Well,
permit.
see,
You
it
can't do it
depends
in
on
other
the
ways. But,
location.
Well, one of the
Yeah,
ways
but
to get
you have
around
a
that
range
is,
of options.
but I certainly
I'm
could.
saying there's
yeah,
a range of
ha-
options,
happy
and you
to add
can pick
sort of-
one and
yeah.
present it.
Yeah.
or you could put a waiver provision in there, and it says by 2/3 vote.
No waivers or, you know,
They're tricky, but
not
But at
favored
least-
anymore. You know that, right?
Well, sometimes it's easier when you have requirements or things written down to be able to guide anybody who comes in to pretty much what is
Right.
expected, what is supposed to come, and what the requirements and regulations show. So, you know, when you get too ambiguous, it does make it very difficult because
Right.
you as an applicant are like, you know, giving us multiple copies and revisions and stuff when really it should be very clear what we expect from you when you come in. And if there's certain pieces that we have to make a determination on, then that's fine. But I think that too much of that going on. I think it's important to be specific. So
That's fine. We can certainly work to try to craft something that has more specificity, but, I mean, I think ultimately some flexibility is desirable because each piece on it has to sort of rise and fall on its own merit, in a sense, but I hear what you're all saying.
Because
Absolutely.
I just have one more comment in terms of, you know, in terms of the maximum density, you know, we just say how many units are allowed per acre, and I think that it should be per developable acre because of the fact that, you know, you could have a very small portion of it that is developable, but you have a large parcel, and then all of a sudden, you know, you can try to stick all the units, you know, on the areas that are developable, and then if you do need 5 acres of parking, you know, where are you going to put the 5 acres of parking? And,
Right.
you know, and again, it should be such that, you know, we don't see, you know, 800 cars. You know, basically, I think that we should see a significantly smaller number than that. And whether it's, you know, have, you know, some, you know, parking lot, you know, parking garages or something else that you would allow, you know, to hide some of these things. But, you know, I don't think that, you know, we should definitely want to see another, you know, shopping center, you know, in front of, you know, one of these units.
Appreciate that.
I think that's a good point, and maybe because this text would address multiple zones, I think that maybe this is an issue of the commission's interpretation, but when you look at the units per acre, is that units per residentially zoned acre, or is that units per all zoned acres? If there is a non-residential use occurring on the non-residential portion of the parcel, is that calculated for how many units per acre you can have on the total parcel? Even, you know, I think that's an issue of interpretation, and maybe the commission can address that with each application, but maybe because this text is supposed to address potentially multiple uses, maybe we need to be more specific about exactly that.
You specify the developable acres and other sections of your regulations by subtracting wetlands and slopes over a certain
should be that way.
slope. So you know that
Gotta be
that can
consistent
be carried.
throughout.
Yeah,
You
that
can't-
can be carried over. It's probably change the density calculation in the regulations as a whole, and apply it everywhere, so it's uniform.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the problems with the regulations now, anyway.
And whatever you do, post whatever pending application is there or withdrawn or come back, but anybody who's read that density calculation used for a recently before you application that's coming back within 90 days, I don't know who wrote that, but that's definitely got to get changed. Have you seen that open space calculation and the density calculation in there?
Where?
You got to get out a slide rule to figure it out.
The one we just got tonight? Yeah.
Yeah, I know too, but we're dating ourselves.
They got things called
We used to
calculators now on
have
computers.
slide rules for the commission. I don't know where they are, probably up in your office somewhere.
What? Is there any other comments? I'm not
Anyone
sure.
further?
Quiet.
Absorbing it all.
Just taking it all in, no matter what.
Other than item 11, I don't know, but Our ordinances say all residences have cellars at the moment.
Yeah, that's.
But this commission has approved developments without
I
basements.
know, but it's
No.
slid by.
No, because that was ruled in court.
We did one, but it was never built.
Yeah,
We let one go by, but it was never built.
No, there is an approved development that
we're
didn't
aware
have.
of it, but then there was a court appeal on another one because of that one. And it was said that that is not,
Because you erred once doesn't mean you have to err twice, is
That's
what it
right.
said.
Right. No, but I'm just saying, you have approved them, and there are some developments that haven't got a building
That
permit
was-
that
that
still
was-
have a valid approval for no basement.
yeah,
Whether you wanted to or not, you did.
that's neither here nor there at this time. Okay. Just one comment. When you want to talk, please raise your hand so I can recognize you and let you talk, because we're getting into each other. So, Attorney Smith, what?
Just one interesting comment on the basement issue. And it may have been why I wasn't here when this happened, but the storage was provided in the attic.
And I think in some cases,
And
this is something
Yeah.
probably needs to be changed. In some cases, in some locations, because
Right.
of the makeup of the town of Enfield, we may have to do that.
Yeah, it's.
But right now, it doesn't
Right.
exist.
It's just generally apartment buildings that generally are constructed don't have basements. You provide laundry facilities in a bunch of ways. Now, most of them are with the units. You provide storage facilities, either it can be a separate building, or in the one we've designed, it would be in the attic space. So, I mean, you
But right
address those
now,
things.
again, our ordinances need to be changed to allow
Right.
that.
Right, exactly, and that was why it was part of this.
I think what I heard tonight is that on the section that referred to basements, or that the commission said you add the section to it that says if you're not having basements, you're providing storage.
Right, exactly. I did hear that.
Go ahead, Ken.
I would just be concerned with the storage in the attic. You're doing 3-story buildings. You got a 1-bedroom apartment on the first floor. They're going to carry their belongings all the way up to the 4th floor.
Elevators?
We provided elevators all the way to the top.
But, Woodgate, all of them, they have full basements under them, laundry facilities in them, storage, all separated
That's what
below
I'm
them.
saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
storage on site is something that I think every tenant actually assumes.
Right.
I don't think you're going to rent a place if you don't provide some type of storage.
Right.
We provide everything in the other units that we have.
Right.
But having them on site is the key. We thought about that when we designed ours for the location we're not talking about. That we actually have, when we did our application that was approved, was for having storage in the attic area. And of course, the only way to get up there is actually full elevator all the way to the access. The basement area was never part of the application before because we provided it up there. And I completely agree that it shouldn't be one of the options. We're actually taking information from a whole bunch of different areas that are part of the regulations now. We're trying to find something that works, of
Absolutely.
what's already there.
Yeah.
To try to find out what makes sense for properties that are probably in between when Enfield has a hard time figuring out, by the presentation that was given to us last time, there's not a lot of places that you could even qualify anyways. So we're trying to find something that would work in an area that probably would have a good fit for this.
Right.
And certainly, it's a transitional design, and it's transitional intended, and that's where we wanted to go. But we agree with most everything you're saying. And the other part, we'll probably figure out a way to make it work anyways.
right. Okay, thank you.
And actually, you mentioned also about transitional. We already have that design in ours originally. We get the idea that people don't want to have noisiness next to them. Of course, we don't want the complaints anyways. Who would? The idea is there's got to be something between the two. We have a very large parcel that maybe we have some options that we can figure out. We want to make sure that it actually fits and works for ourselves as well. But I don't think there's anything here that anybody has said that we couldn't figure something out to make it be something positive for the town.
Like across the street, they did a good job.
I had to say something, right?
Okay, anything further? All right, and this was just a discussion, so. Okay,
Director of Planning does not have a report tonight,
oh, good.
so
Thank you for your time.
Barry, that's from Barry. No, not yet. Commissioners' correspondence, any commissioner with anything that they have noticed?
Just one. We seem to be growing trailers on Hazard Avenue near Big Y, that big field. There was one, now there's two. It's up to 5. I mean, I didn't know we had a trailer farm growing out there.
Oh, that's the farm.
Yeah.
Yes, Rebel, not Revelese,
I know, I can't remember their
on
name.
Middle Road, yeah, the farmer. He supplies corn to a lot of people, but I don't know if that's what he uses for storage or what.
They've been sitting there, and there's like a driveway, looks like a driveway cut, so I don't know what's going on there, but
That farmer on Middle Road is building a barn. Maybe he's storing stuff in there.
yeah, well, we don't allow trailer trucks to be stored, so.
Well, farmers.
I mean,
kind of-
trailers.
Farmers have got
Yeah,
a different, I know.
Farmers are
Again.
kind of,
Take a
You're
look at
seeing
it.
it from Hazard Avenue.
Take a look at it. You have anything further from, okay, you have Zoning Practice Magazine.
I got one other further. Moody Road and Elm Street, that corner, behind all those plastic houses, the
Oh,
buildings have fallen down, they got truck park over there and junk in there again.
That never was cleared out, I don't think, because I go over that
I
way all
don't
the
know, but
time.
it's,
is that the triangle you're talking about?
no, right by the, you come down from the police station, the stop sign becomes Elm Street, Moody Road.
Right across the street.
Right
There's
across the
always
street.
been a trailer there. There's all kinds of junk. I mentioned it
I don't know, maybe
before.
because the snow's gone away, you
I don't know
can
who
see it
owns
better
it.
or what, but they got a pretty good collection again. So,
Okay.
That was on one of the items they were working on,
Yep,
wasn't it? It
yep.
was part of that brochure that,
Yep.
when they said Sam's was taken care of and it wasn't.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I mean, they're
Well, he's got a
working
whole
on-
list of stuff he's working on, but good to remind him once in a while. Besides,
Okay.
he's only got 20 hours and a big list.
Kenny wanted to do it.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
I know, I'm like, come on.